Corruption in India is as old as, well, I guess civilization is in India, and civilization in India is fairly old. It has dogged our psyche for a long time. So much so that in the year we gained independence, we passed the Prevention of Corruption Act. Didn't do much. We updated it in 1988 when we brought or attached criminal liability to public corruption, and so that they could be prosecuted criminally. We are in the business now of updating it further so that you now have public service being combined in it. And more importantly, till now, or till say sometime last year, the bribe giver was not being criminally implicated. Hopefully, he will also be criminally implicated now. We have had lots of other acts like the Right to Information Act, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and only very recently we passed the act which we call the Lokpal Act or the Lok Ayukt Act, which is to deal with the Ombudsman. We have an agency in India called the Central Vigilance Commission, which is supposed to administer these acts. And the Central Vigilance Commission does the oversighting or the supervision of the Central Bureau of Investigation. So that is the investigation arm. The Auditor General in India does not do any investigation. The Auditor General merely conducts audits of the government, whether it's a regional government or the central government, and government enterprises also. As and when the Auditor General finds that there is a certain element of irregularity in any of the audits that is being conducted, that information is passed on to the Vigilance Commission for them to get it investigated. So that is a distinction between auditing and the investigation. We do not, in the auditing department, have wherewithal to conduct investigation. But now let me tell you about some models of corruption in public contracting or procurement that over the years India has been facing. And believe me, as we try to plug leakages, as we try to improve procedures, the models for ensuring that there's leakage in procurement or contracting also become that much more sophisticated. Not only sophisticated, they are no longer content with taking off 10%, 15%, 20% of the total package, but they would like to be taking off much more than that. Now, the first model in this is what was just a leakage from the contract, the quantum or the magnitude or the amount of contract, which means suppose a road had to be constructed, suppose a bridge had to be constructed, suppose a building had to be constructed, maybe the cost of it was increased by, say, about 18%, 20%, and this 18%, 20% to be shared as spoils between those agencies which were to be approving and administering that contract. That's the most conservative, most conventional model. In the 40 years that I've been in government, this number kept increasing from, say, roughly 10%, early 70s, and would have reached about 18 to 20%, if not more. But the issue that I'm trying to say is that elements who are interested in ensuring leakage from government revenues are the ones who are still not satisfied with this leakage of 18 to 20%. And that's where they got into more sophisticated forms, which was to ensure that an artificial urgency or an emergency kind of a situation is created so that the procedures that have to be followed as per governmental norms, those procedures are not followed. And the most illustrative example of this was the models that were followed in the contracting for the Commonwealth Games that was conducted in India in 2010. Simplest form, let me give you a categoric example. Catering contract for the Games Village. It's a huge contract. The process to award the catering contract was commenced about 15 months in advance of the Games. The Games were held on the 4th of October 2010. For some reason or the other, that the people who were supposed to be approving this contract kept saying, no, let's get better inputs, let's get more people, let's try to be more, believe me, transparent, that they were saying. On paper, you will see all these arguments being rolled out. But the sum total of all that they were trying to do was to delay the contract. And come roughly July of 2010, the contract had still not been awarded. Then emergency sets in, urgency sets in, panic is created, and then they say, okay, now the laid down procedures of government cannot be followed. You can't have global bidding. You cannot provide 6 weeks of time to the bidders to put in their thing. You can't provide 3 weeks of time to examine the bids, etc., etc., etc. And hence, either from past experience, performance of global contractors, we nominate a caterer, or we accept a single bid. Now, in both these forms, obviously, the benefit of competition is lost. Competitive bidding doesn't take place, which means ultimately the loser is the agency which is awarding the contract. And that's how it went. It was awarded to somebody who was a single bidder, and then thereby lies a tale. But that was the kind of thing that was. Then another sophistication is rigging bids. And this is what we've noticed to be most in defense kind of contracts, large ticket contracts, where you decide that agency A is going to be supplying whatever equipment that we need. You also decide that agency A needs to be given the contract, and hence you create your specifications tailor-made to the equipment that agency A is going to supply. And once you've done that, you go in for a global bidding or a request for proposals, and you can easily eliminate B, C, or D, saying that they do not meet the specifications of the equipment that we require. And so you may have only one, or at best, you eliminate everybody else and have probably one more, just for the sake of putting up an appearance that you actually did have competitive bidding. And that's where the rigging takes place. This we found mostly in defense kind of contracts. Now, the latest of these is largely in infrastructure kind of contracts, where we found concessions being awarded to the party which has got the contract post approval. In this form, what is done is you just about decide much in advance that A is your crony and A is going to be awarded the contract. A is advised to bid low. So there is competitive bidding, maybe even global, but A, knowing that he is the chosen crony, bids low, and by bidding low, unrealistically low, he gets the contract. Now, once he's got the contract, papers have approved, and he commences work, then technical problems emerge, commercial problems emerge, problems which supposedly are force majeure, problems which supposedly were not seen in advance, and hence he starts seeking concessions or exemptions. And these are granted to him post-award of the contract. And Well, we have any number of such examples, and I'd like to give you one example, which is what we call ultra mega power projects, where a contract is awarded based on the unit, the rate to be charged for a unit of power, and that unit of power, believe me, it's 1 rupee 20 paise. That's the contract. 1 rupee 21 paise to be more precise. Power which you must be buying in Bangalore for roughly about 7 rupees, if I'm right, thereabouts in that range. But the developer bid it for 1 rupee 20 paise. He got the contract. After the contract was awarded to him, and the contract came with assured fuel linkage to set up a power project. After it was awarded to him, within 6 or 8 months of its being awarded to him, he decided that the coal which was to accrue to him from the captive coal mines, which was supposed to be linked to his project, was insufficient, and hence he put in an application for one more coal mine. And he got it too. Now, that coal mine was the bonus, and that's the coal mine from which he is not only supplying coal to his power plant, but is happily selling that coal out in the open market, with which he's ensuring that the rate at which he contracted is much more than made up. Now, then we have the joint ventures of the public-private partnerships, yet a higher level of sophistication that we have reached. The public-private partnerships were seen in India as a panacea, some kind of a panacea to ensure physical infrastructure coming up, roads, bridges, airports, ports, power plants, etc., etc. And in each of these, again, I think the first one from which we should have learned was a power plant which was offered to us early 90s, late 80s, Enron, by Enron. Enron those days, as per the Forbes magazine, was actually the most innovative company of the world. And innovative, I would like to read in inverted commas. It was some kind of a global Rambo, if I can call it. And we really thought that if we can entice Enron to come to the country and set up a power plant, we've arrived. They did do it. All said and done, a concession agreement obviously is from between two parties. Each has to, there's no denying the fact, each has to look after its own interests. Enron more than looked after their own interest. That kind of a concession agreement was new to India. We weren't really experienced in it, and hence we lost out, and we lost out very severely. Enron pulled out. There was a lot of problem, and we are stuck with the power plant, which we are trying to operate now. But basically, that was one of those things. Then we have another one, gas exploration in various places, including offshore, where again, the concession agreement, the model of the concession agreement, and it's being discussed in the newspapers every day. One is a model on which the project was given out 5 years back on the principle of investment multiple, as it's called. And the other one is of the aggregate revenues, which is being discussed. Again, within 1 year of the gas exploration project being granted approval, I'm talking about the KG D6 basin, at a price which was globally bid at $4.20 per MMBTU, or whatever it's called. Within 1 year, the concessionaire or the operator started asking for increase of the price to double that. Now, there is no reason why that should be permitted, because it's a 5-year contract. And the concessionaire has walked into the contract with his eyes open against global bids. But that's it again, the attempt to try and get the contract terms changed post-award of that contract. We've had any number of such examples in National Highways Authority, some good, some not very good, some may be genuine. There's no denying the fact that this is some very genuine. But in such instances, it becomes very difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. You can't really make out which is the genuine one and which is not the very genuine one. Coal mines, there are any number of examples which are being discussed in the newspapers. I don't want to get into this. But all this has led to a certain expression which has emerged in the Indian context, which is known as crony capitalism. And what does this mean? That you award such major contracts to your cronies. Your cronies could be anybody you choose. My argument would be that, well, if the crony delivers, it's still all right. Probably the entire process, well, really can't be pardoned, but can be forgiven for the fact that they have done a good job in delivering whatever the infrastructure project that they were supposed to complete. But most of these cronies did not have the domain knowledge of the contract that they picked up. And you have classic examples of real estate developers getting into telecom and the like, any number of them. None of these cronies had the financial resources to be able to fulfill contracts of the kind. And they were heavily over-leveraged financially. The debt equity was heavily skewed, with the result that today you have non-performing assets of roughly about 90,000 crores, as we call them, which are pending with different banks because these people have not been able to service their loans. Now, that is getting into the financial sector also, and this crony capitalism is ultimately going to be ruining the balance sheets of the banks too. Now, research analysts in Bombay did a very interesting study of 75 companies which they called connected, which could also be called cronies, if you like it. Now, these, in September 2010, if one were to take the index of these companies to be, say, at 100 as per the Bombay Stock Exchange, whereas the Bombay Stock Exchange 3 years later on September 2013, after moving up and down, had settled at 100 again. These 75 companies, their net worth had come down to 37, which clearly indicates that once their connections came out into the open, once they could not perform, once they landed into legal and financial difficulties, their share value kept declining very rapidly. And they are at 37 today, only those 75 companies as against the rest, which continue to be 100 after movements up and down. Anyway, it's a bit of a sordid story, if I can say so. A lot of concern has been going into it, but I still believe in a large number of ways that going forward, henceforth, I'm fairly bullish or upbeat, if you ask me, because I see things changing over the last 6 to 8 months, about a year, things which have come to light and are not being appreciated by the bulk of the population. Maybe the citizen on one side, government elements on the other side, but more importantly, those who are the contractors themselves. And I say this because I've interacted with a large number of mid-sized business groups who are in this business, but more importantly, because they are in the age group 40 to 45. And I have firm belief that this Gen Next would rather play the game by the rules of the game. They would any day want to stand in the queue, await their turn, rather than jump the queue, take shortcuts for short-term gains, and thereby try to move forward in whatever immoral kind of a methods that their predecessors have employed. So I think with better e-administration, electronic administration, electronic contracting, with better transparency and with a better oversighting, which now we are beginning to do, whether it's from the societal elements or from within government itself, things are improving. The concession agreements, the drafts are being prepared more objectively, and hopefully going forward we'll have better administered contracts being implemented.